Welcome to Government. This is Will Sanchez. My honored guest tonight is Eric Seiff. He is a member and the former chairman of the Friends of Cortlandt Park. I met Eric a few years ago on the Putnam Trail.
The idea that we can't work out some kind of accommodation either just by a very modest expenditure of tidying up small portions of this hard-packed trail, or doing what was done 15, 17 years ago for the cross-country trail, which was using crushed rock, which has the same feel as hard-packed dirt. It seems to me would be a perfectly appropriate accommodation.
I'm thrilled to have Eric as a guest.
Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome, Eric. Eric, let's get started by introducing yourself to our audience. For example, tell us where you were born and something of your childhood.
Well, I grew up in Mount Vernon as a pre-war child. Did not get involved in running. It was a freer time, and we spent our days just going outside and playing. When I got to high school, I was small, not very coordinated, and something of a scaredy cat. And somehow I drifted into cross country in my junior year in high school.
In high school. Which high school was that, Eric?
At that point, I was no longer living in Mount Vernon. I had been sent away to boarding school in Connecticut.
You said you were a scaredy cat. You didn't have any brothers or sisters?
I had an older sister who was everything I was not. She was smart, she was attractive, she was popular, and she was a terrific athlete, and she protected me.
Oh, right. All right, but in boarding school, you had to mend for yourself.
Yeah, of course. And I did that by staying under the radar.
Now, you said you discovered running in your junior year in boarding school?
Yeah, yes.
So what's it about it you liked?
We were obligated to take a sport, and I was not yet, in order to move up to the intramural non-midget league in football, you had to weigh 105 pounds, and I didn't get there.
Really? You were really small.
I think I was a little bit intimidated by my shins getting kicked in soccer, so I said, I'll try and run.
Okay. You went off to college, I think?
Yes.
And where did you go?
I went to Yale. And actually, I went to Yale because I had a summer job beginning after my junior year in high school, and I worked with an exterminating company, and we sprayed children's camps. And one of the camps in the Catskills was owned by a man named Bob Geekengak, who was the Yale coach. And I went around with an older 30-year-old who took the 16-year-old with him, and we would go into the bunks in June and spray the bunks. And he brought me over to the owner, Geekengak, and he said, hey, Bob, I have a runner for you. And this august coach said, oh, yeah, kid, what'd you run? And I said, I ran cross country, sir. And he said, and what'd you do in the spring? And I said, well, I played JV tennis, sir. And he said, what did you do that for? And right away, I knew that was my man.
Okay.
And that was the principal reason why I applied to Yale. And it turned out to be a wonderful decision. I ran for 3 seasons a year for 4 years, and he was one of the most important men in my life. He was a true mentor, a true coach, a true educator.
What did you major in college?
American Studies, which was what one majored in when they couldn't decide what they wanted to major in.
Okay. But now you're a well-respected lawyer, so when did you decide that lawyering was the thing to do?
Well, when I was in my senior year and I realized I had to move on from this wonderful undergraduate experience, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I thought that probably working with my mind would ensure a greater longevity than if I tried to make a living with my body. And I also felt very strongly about family and having a family life. And I think the only other career that I gave any thought to was archaeology, and my limited knowledge of archaeology at that time would be a lot of outdoor living, which attracted me a great deal, but probably also in very primitive environments, and that was antithetical to my sense that I wanted to have a family somewhere along the way.
And therefore, lawyer came up?
Well, I think probably going to law school was delaying the decision for 3 years.
I see. You weren't inspired by Perry Mason or To Kill a Mockingbird?
At that point, no. In fact, it was before To Kill a Mockingbird came out, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, it's now in the news, of course, because they discovered the prequel. Oh, no, is it? No, I guess it's the prequel, but it's really after.
Yeah. It's both. It sandwiches it. It was written before and takes place after.
Okay. So you weren't inspired by television or the movies to be a lawyer?
This was largely pre-television. We did not own a television set until well into my law school career, but certainly not in college.
That is amazing.
Television, in my generation, a dramatic change in the way in which we received information, the way in which we became aware of what others had and had not. I had no sense as a child that there were others out there with so much more. And I think that was, in retrospect, very fortunate.
That's interesting. Do you have grandchildren?
I do.
Do you? What do they think of when you tell them stories of those old days?
They don't understand how I can survive without a cell phone.
Gosh, and how do you stay in touch with them? Do they Skype you? Do they Facebook you, friends?
I still use a telephone, and therefore they're keeping in touch with that instrument as well. And I do exchange email with them because I use a computer at work.
So I guess when you were a lawyer, that's when Perry Mason came out and all these other shows. What did you think of these TV shows that showed lawyers? Were you inspired by them, or were you surprised by them?
I'm sort of that Kennedy generation that was drawn to public service by the Kennedy administration, the Kennedy vocabulary, and that's what I did for many years. I started off in the district attorney's office, I suppose. There's a Perry Mason piece to that, but he'd always be on the other side. But that began both my work in the public area and my respect for those people whom I met and worked with in the public sector.
Okay, well, what kind of work did you do as a lawyer?
I began as a prosecutor, and at one point I decided that I'd very much like to live overseas. And when I left the DA's office, I joined something called the Agency for International Development and was assigned happily to Rio de Janeiro. And so with my wife and my then 3 children, we moved down there for 2 years. And that was a mixed experience. I loved being in Brazil. I loved the Brazilian culture. I loved learning Portuguese. I had a lot of reservations about what our government was doing with this program, and made up my mind that I would not continue with it, with the foreign service aspect of it. And so in one sense, I thought of my 2 years down there as a vacation, so I never took a vacation. And we also got money for flight tickets home, so instead of flying home, I decided that we'd drive back. And so we spent 6 months driving from Rio to New York.
Wait a minute, how did you do that? There's an ocean there, isn't there?
Well, first we headed south to Tierra del Fuego, and then came up what's known as the Pan American Highway. When you get to northern Colombia, you're quite right, you cannot, unless you've got super honed up vehicles, you cannot drive through the Isthmus of Panama. So we took a freighter from Cartagena in Colombia to Panama City. The car in the freighter, and then we got back in our car and finished the trip. It was a great adventure, and for me, although I hadn't thought about it at the outset, the most enduring part of it was being with my wife, and more importantly, to some extent, the children, 24 hours a day. When most of us, when we go to work in the morning, the children are having their full lives, and then they're having another 8 hours a day in bed, if not more. I was never out of touch with the children for 6 months, and that
Wow.
created a glue that I'm convinced has endured to this day.
Oh, of course.
And
of
certainly took us through some difficult times that we had as a family along the way.
I would imagine there have been some scary moments, besides running out of gas.
Well, we broke an axle on 3 separate occasions.
That's an adventure I'm sure they, even though they were relatively young, they still remember quite well.
And joke about it.
All right. Now, your name appears on the masthead of this law firm. Well, tell us about the law firm that you're with now.
I was with the State Investigation Commission, and I became chair at the end of my stay there. I never belonged to a political party, so I was an independent. And by statute, there were 4 commissioners, and no more than 2 could be from the same political party. So we had 2 Democrats, a Republican, and me. And some of our investigations got into highly sensitive areas politically, and it left, one in particular left the Republican leader, state leader, in considerable discomfort. So he went to the Democratic governor and he said, I want a second Republican on that commission. And the governor was faced with either having 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat, and me, or 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So when my term was up, that was the end. At that point, those 7, 8, and 9-year-old children were all in high school. They were beginning to send away for college brochures, and I was getting nervous. I decided because I had no political support, the thing to do was hang up my shingle, which I did. And I had an old friend who had along the way achieved considerable success in the public sector, and later on even more, named Nick Scopetta. And when he saw after a year that I could survive, I persuaded him to join me, and so we started the firm just 35 years ago. We've had a wonderful time at it. He was very close to Rudy Giuliani, and he had an extraordinary life story, having spent a number of years in a foster home. And when the children's welfare program was in a shambles in the, I guess, the late 80s, Giuliani came to him and said, I really need your help. And so Nick came over initially to be a consultant, but he immediately became the commissioner, stayed there through the Giuliani term, and then told me he was coming back. And a short time before he came back, Giuliani's successor, Bloomberg, called him up and said, I need a fire commissioner. And Nick said, I don't know anything about fires except some stories you probably don't want to hear about from my youth. And Bloomberg said, no, I know you're a manager. And so Nick stayed there for another 4 years and came back about 5 years ago.
You always had a home at your firm.
Well, he certainly does.
Sounds like he was well valued.
Yeah, he's an extraordinary fellow.
Okay. Well, I'm sure he'd probably say the same of you. So you exist now. You're on Madison Avenue. So what do you specialize nowadays?
Once I went into private practice, I began doing criminal defense work, which I still do. And along the way, I got involved in family law. And so I do a lot of work with couples in distress, children's issues, the family court, divorce proceedings, domestic violence, and then a sort of a general smattering of litigation.
Yeah.
I'm a litigator, and I've litigated in surrogates court. I do some contract work. I've even been in tax court, but
gosh,
the bulk of my practice is criminal
defense. You keep very busy. Do you work a 40-hour plus week?
I've managed to keep a balance. As I said at the outset, my pole star is my family, and I've tried very hard not to be consumed by a life away from my family. But it's a full life. I work from morning till evening. I'm home almost every night for dinner, and I try not to bring work. I may bring work home on weekends, but I try not to go to the office on weekends.
Okay, so I mentioned you were the former chair of the Friends of Van Cortlandt Park, a beautiful organization that's well respected, has many, many honors, many awards. How did that happen that first you joined and then rose up to be its chairman?
When my younger son graduated from college, one of the speakers at his commencement was the 105-year-old George Abbott. He was a much better exponent of dialogue, but he said, when people ask me, why do they listen to you? I say, just live long enough. So I got involved very early in Van Cortlandt Park, and because I loved the program that they were doing for children, and I had run in the park off and on from the early 50s, and so I really cared about the trail, which was deteriorating. I just sort of hung around, and eventually I was one of the senior members of the group.
And therefore, you were the logical choice to be chairman.
Well, that's probably correct.
Well, I guess it's a board that you got voted on, right?
Yeah. There have been a number of chairs.
Oh, okay,
there have been a number of chairs. Yeah.
Okay. And what was the best experience of being chair?
I think revitalizing the board, bringing in a board that more fully reflects the perimeter of the park. The program was started by a small group, I think exclusively women, who wanted to do something for the school children and introducing them into the park, and they did that extremely well. And most of them moved on to other challenges. I was interested in the park and staying with the park, and I also wanted to see if I couldn't get the cross-country trail resurfaced. So that was what kept me on longer than a number of other people.
In fact, you did get the cross-country resurfaced.
Yes, we did. We got wonderful help from a federal transportation employee who happened to be a cross-country runner. And they had a program called Cythe, where they sent money out to the states to improve access to walking and running. And I read about this, and I called this fellow up because I'd read about his running exploits, and I told him what I was interested in. And then we had a terrific youngster in the park at that time who was our employee named Ramsey Adams. He and I put together a program with the help of a number of the coaches in the area, both college and high school, and went to the Parks Department and said, we'd like to go ahead with this. And they said, well, you have to do it with us. And we said, that's fine, we will. And so they packaged it and put it in, and they, to my horror, they had put in a request for just a few hundred yards of improvement, and the major portion of the trail that we wanted addressed was about 1.5 miles, a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. So the following year, I learned my lesson, and what I did was I lined up a lot of the high school and parochial school cross-country coaches who all come in to Van Cortlandt Park every fall in droves, and they became my advocacy group, and they put a lot of input with the state agency, and then the state agency got the city to do the right thing the second time around, and we ended up with about $250,000. And then, to its credit, the City Parks Department brought in a contractor who did a spectacular job in resurfacing the trail.
And it was resurfaced with crushed rock? What was the material?
Yeah, it was crushed rock, and it was actually a little bit finer in appearance than I had anticipated. I thought we'd still have dirt. But in retrospect, this is certainly an adequate alternative. It stood up very well with the exception of the early Bloomberg years when that parks commissioner just couldn't be interested in maintenance. But in the final Bloomberg term, and certainly with the de Blasio mayoralty, they've done a terrific job in keeping that trail in shape.
They increased the maintenance budget a bit, I guess.
Well, there have been a number of factors. The New York Roadrunners has given money to provide for maintenance. Friends has become better heeled, and we have various kinds of programs that have brought any number of people in to work on trails, even if not the cross-country trail. And I think that interest has spilled over.
Also, the Van Cortlandt Track Club, with their membership,
Absolutely,
they do
yeah, the
events.
Yes, and there have been volunteer efforts, including by the track club.
Right. Interesting. I wonder why those efforts, that history didn't carry over to the Putnam Nature Trail. Any theories on that? Because, as you know, the controversy is the parks insist on asphalting it.
I think it's partially an inadequate open-mindedness. I go back to even a larger undertaking by the department, which was the parade grounds. And they spent, I think, $12–14 million on the parade grounds.
Beautiful grounds.
And did a terrific job, except they destroyed that open cross-country historic first half mile by fencing so much of it off to protect the baseball players. And so on the weekends, they've either changed the course, altered the dimensions of the races, or with the exception of a couple of national races, required the runners to start at the traditional place, but then to cram onto that track that parallels Broadway. From my youth, for the next 50 years, you would have that first half mile down that broad, open fielded expanse, and you can't do that now because of the pitcher's mounds and the fencing. And so that was a goal that was understandably in play to improve the baseball fields, but no consideration was given to what they were doing to this historic venue. I think the same thing happened with the Putnam Trail. Somebody looked at the trail and said, gee, this really needs some work, and it does. And then somewhere along the way, and I believe before there was any community involvement, somebody said, well, they've paved it in Westchester, we'll do the same, it'll make upkeep moderate, and we can move on.
Yes. Well, that's very short-sighted.
Yes.
But of course, I'm involved in keeping it natural.
Along with many other people.
I know. I'm very proud that you were able to participate in my documentary. And that documentary went on to win awards.
Well, as it should have. And I know that Parks Department is indefatigable, despite its repeated exposures as to the lack of integrity in the way in which they've approached this trail and the rejection for environmental reasons. They're back at the batter's swinging away.
When I got involved, the then council member, Coppell, told us that train has left the station, forget about it. We're asphalting as soon as possible. Luckily, we were not only able to stop that train, it's back in the station, but as you know, they're working on a master plan, and in that master plan, it still calls for some kind of permeable asphalting.
Well, it's even more current than that. They are going ahead with new plans. We've been told that they've resubmitted or in the process of resubmitting for, I guess it's to the environmental department, to get the approval that was denied the first time. And that they fully intend to go and put the asphalt down.
Interesting. You said denied. It's one of the interesting things I was just reading recently. The Parks Department claims that they were never denied that last permit. The Department of Environmental Conservation simply didn't give it. So they're still playing word games.
Yes, they've not been transparent about what their role has been, how they've gone about it, what the true involvement of the community has been.
Well, the battle continues. But two more short things. One is any personal race that you're looking forward to? One more hurrah, or
Well,
the next big thing
The
running?
next big race is Saturday in Harlem. I think it's in honor of Percy Sutton. They have a nice turnout, and it's a real good event.
Oh, will you run with Senator Perkins? Do you know Senator Perkins?
I do. In the old days, I used to see Senator Perkins run by me. Now he's so far ahead that I don't see him anymore.
And then
we have
finally-
the cross-country season coming up.
Okay, so you're going to be a busy fellow running.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. And I guess sometimes you run with George Hirsch because he's still
Oh,
twaddles.
boy, he's fabulous.
Oh, great,
Yeah.
great. All right, and then professionally, you continue to be a lawyer for as long as you do
Until
it?
either my body or my mind breaks down, and both are certain to happen, and I just hope it doesn't happen too soon.
All right, we wish you continued great success. Keep the battle going, keep running, and thank you for coming in.
Well, thank you, and I want you to keep the battle going too, because you've been so helpful to.
Right. Coming from you, that's a great honor.
Thanks.
It's a pleasure.